Welcome to Curious Christianity. Today I am reviewing my debate that I just did with Apologeti, Matt. I just had it on Keith Foskey's channel, so support your local Calvinist. And so my debate was on young earth creationism. The topic was specifically, does the Bible teach that the earth is young? And I argued that it does not. And so how did I feel like this debate went? I feel like the debate went pretty well. I definitely feel like I could prepare a little bit more and a little better for my initial statements and rebuttal statements. But overall, I think it went okay. I was also getting a little bit used to the timekeeper. So the timekeeper in this case was supposed to give us a 1-minute warning at the end, which he did throughout the debate, except for in my closing statement. And I was a little bit relying on that for my closing statement. And then he's kind of like, yeah, time's up. And I'm like, oh, okay. Well, that wasn't exactly perfect, but I think next time I'll structure things a little differently to be a little more prepared for that. Overall, this was my first live official debate online. And I hope for many more up to come. In fact, actually, I've already had Ben, Macrophage, has already challenged me to a debate on young earth creationism as well. And so I'll look forward to a debate with him. That is to be determined when it will be held, but I'm hoping we will be able to find another moderator and kind of have a similar result as this one. And so I'm looking forward to another young earth creationism debate. And I think that we'll probably have a more robust debate in some ways in the future. This was a really good first go, but I really felt like Matt did not really address a lot of my points. I do feel like he was expecting certain arguments and certain points, and I just came at it from perhaps a different angle than he was expecting. A lot of the objections and questions that I was trying to make, he actually almost didn't entirely understand. Now, let me make it clear what my primary point of the debate was. My primary point of the debate was that there is material creation, there is earth prior to the first day of creation. And this is very, very crucial point. And it was all of my arguments were basically surrounding this. And this comes from Genesis 1 and 2. So Genesis 1 and 2 just says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was formless and void. Darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God hovered over the waters. And then in verse 3, it says, and God said, let there be light. And he separated the light from the darkness, and he called the light day, and he called the darkness night. And there was evening and morning, the first day. And essentially my point is this. The first day of creation is in verse 3. And all of the days of creation are presupposing that there is a material earth already existent. That's it. It's real simple. And in fact, the primary point is that all of the 6 days of creation call back to verse 2. All of the days are calling back to the idea that there is this physical creation already present. And if there is something physically present prior to day 1, that means you do not know when that was created. If you don't know when it was created, you cannot know how old the earth is. And that was essentially my argument. And I didn't really feel like he had an entirely too many counter arguments. I feel like the primary bulk of his point was to presuppose that the first day of creation must be the first day of all of creation. And of course, I don't think this is the case. One example that I gave during the debate was the subject of the angels. And Job 38 actually gives this little argument that says, and the sons of God sang for joy at the creation. And it's kind of talking about this, the creation. It's the idea that the angels were watching when we have the 6 days of creation going on. And so that also kind of presupposes this idea that there are angels watching the creation. And so if there are angels watching the creation, then, well, we have something else that has to precede creation, right? So that means that there are other things created before day 1. And therefore that means that there is time before day 1. And so I'm just saying, it's like, okay, look, it seems clear to me, if you believe the angels are created prior to day one, that means that time begins before day one. Similarly, as you continue and move along, that ends up leading into, it's like, okay, so that means that day one of the 6 days of creation is not necessarily the very, very first day of all of creation. It is a presupposition to say that the first day of these 6 days of creation simply is the first day of all of creation. I think, honestly, this has a little bit of a human-centric view. It's the view that humans are kind of at the center of everything, and therefore God is doing everything for us, and that we, have to be like the primary purpose, primary point. And I only mention this briefly. I'm not saying this is a major, major point, but it just reminds me of back in the day, there was the whole issue of geocentrism or heliocentrism. And so geocentrism was the belief that the Earth was the center of the universe and everything sort of revolved around it. And heliocentrism is the notion, right, that the sun is at the center and we revolve around it. And the idea was, it just seemed like mankind is at the center of the universe. But in reality, the center of the universe is the sun and we revolve around it. And likewise, I just feel like when you actually look at the rest of creation, of course, mankind is extremely important. And of course, the incarnation is one of the most central points of everything. But Genesis 1 is not focused on all things. Like I said, there's no mention of angels being created in Genesis 1. And I think that's a very obvious, well, why not? They play central roles throughout the rest of the Bible, and you even see the cherubim show up in Genesis 3. So why aren't the angels mentioned? And again, it's just about what was the point of the story. It's talking about things related to mankind. Anyway, so back to debate. So the primary statements, our opening statements and the opening rebuttal, those went over pretty decently. I won't say they were great. I still have a lot of work to do on presenting super well and making those articulated as well. But then, of course, we got to the cross-examination. Hands down my favorite part. Hands down the part that I felt like very, very comfortable in. So part of his big argument was Exodus 20. He basically hinged a lot of his argument to counter my idea that the material creation existed prior to day one on Exodus 20. So Exodus 20 basically is during the 10 Commandments, and it's basically explaining the Sabbath and stuff like that. And it says that in 6 days, God created the heavens and the earth and the seas in which we're in them. And he basically uses that to explain that the seas are created on day one. However, it nowhere in the text says that. It just says that God in 6 days created the heavens and the earth and all that's in them. But it doesn't say that the seas are created on day one, which I think is a major problem for his view. The problem is that if you have water and earth before the first day of creation, then you already have some material in which had to have been created earlier, and so therefore you don't know when the earth begins. So what he wanted to say was that water is part of the first day of creation. Now, he actually kind of hedged a little bit because I was having a hard time understanding. He wasn't really willing to nail his position down because he's like, well, no, the first two verses are a summary passage. And I'm like, okay, if they're a summary passage, then are they real? Do they exist? Is there something actually there? And I had a hard time getting him. He's kind of like, yes, but yeah. So, and he's like, well, okay, so it's real and it's all there, but it was on the first day of creation for him. And I just thought that was kind of interesting. But here was my big pushback. He's using Exodus 20 to explain what Genesis 1 means. Okay? This is sort of backward hermeneutics. It's backward Bible study. You should use Genesis 1 to interpret what Exodus 20 means, not use Exodus 20 to interpret what Genesis means. And so I think that when we read Genesis 1, we see that the water is already there. And so therefore, when you read Exodus 20, talking about the 6 days of creation, and it is specific in saying the 6 days of creation, you should think when it says, oh, he created the waters, that it's referring to the separation of waters. It's referring to the separation of waters from above and below, from the land and the water. And so it's like, okay, well, it's referring to the separation of waters, and that is what it's talking about concerning creation. And this leads to our next major contention. His next major contention was the idea that material creation, these days must be referring to material creation, and that I am using some sort of mystical ancient Near Eastern interpretation or hermeneutic to interpret these. But I feel like I showed that this is evident that even the text itself, like when it says make and create, his point is that when it says make and create, it must be referring to material. But I gave 2 examples. One is that on day 1, when it says he created the light, right? Let there be light. And he separated the light from the darkness. And he called the light day and the darkness night. Is the day a material thing? And my answer is no. The daytime, it's more of an idea. It's more of an idea to this is the daytime, right? That is the nighttime. Again, this is not a scientific book, but the primary point here is that what it's referring to is day and night. And when you look at the first 3 days, you don't see a lot of material creation. God he separates the light from the darkness. What about that makes me think that he created it? Right? Now, everyone just uses that one. So let's use the second day to help clear up the first day. Right? Day 2, he created an expanse. What's an expanse? It's just space. He just created space to separate the waters above and the waters below. Now, that's incredibly important because what we're going to see on day 3, and he separated the waters from the land. Now, what's going on? You have 3 days of separating, but even more relevant, what is God separating? In each one of those days, it calls back to verse 2 of Genesis 1. And there was formlessness and void and darkness, right? The first day is dealing with the darkness. The next day is dealing with the form, right? It's starting to separate. It's starting to shape it. God is shaping the world. And so I don't see any talk about material creation because each one of those days presupposes what is happening. It's presupposing that there is water, that there is land. It's presupposing the things are already there. And then it's simply addressing it from that point forward. So this actually gets into one other part, which we didn't talk about too much, but I do think is relevant for those that are concerned that it's like, well, like, are you saying that the universe existed for forever or that there was no creation of the materials by God? I'm not necessarily saying that at all. So don't be confused. I'm not saying that. But he actually brought up during the debate, the temple inauguration of Solomon's temple. I think he did, or it came up during one of the Q&As. I can't remember. And I actually really like that question because when you see a temple inauguration, for instance, the tabernacle, when Moses inaugurates the tabernacle, he does it for 7 days. All right. And then the inauguration is complete. And Solomon's temple, he has actually 7 days followed by 7 days. And it specifically mentions it as 7 days and 7 days. So you have these 7-day inaugurations. Now, here's my question. Does anybody, any king, anyone ever inaugurate a temple they didn't build? I would suggest to you the answer is no. So when God is going through the 7 days of creation, and there is any pre-existing material, I don't think that somebody ever, claims the 7 days with stuff they haven't really built. So I would say it's very, very reasonable. And especially if you include, other verses that, God has created everything, both the visible and invisible, from Colossians 1 and some other passages. I just think that it's really not a problem. And then even those who basically hold to something similar as what I'm proposing also say we all believe that God ultimately created everything. It's just a matter that when we're talking about the 6-day creation period, that is not a creation from nothing. That's all I'm saying. And I think to say that the first day of the 6 days of creation must therefore be the absolute beginning is a presupposition that I don't see in the text. I feel like Genesis 1 is rather clear that there is pre-existing material when you start day 1 of the 6-day creation account. So for that, I was rather happy with the debate. I'm really, really interested in debating other topics. I've got a little list. I'm interested in debating conditional immortality, Amillennialism, almost anything in Genesis chapter 3. I actually am also really interested in doing a debate on soul sleep. So if you're out there, somebody who's interested in a debate. Oh, also, I will take more people on young earth creationism. I guess if somebody wants to argue about young earth creationism, I'm more than happy to argue. Shoot me a message, leave a comment. And if you like this video, share with your friends.